All right, please be seated. Good morning, members of the jury. I know everybody's thinking about the snowstorm that is supposed to be starting shortly and going into this afternoon. I don't think it has started yet. I want you to know I'm going to continue to assess the situation, and at noon we should have a better idea of how bad it's going to be. So I will continue to monitor that, and if it looks like it'll be a driving issue, we may terminate today early. Okay, just to let you know I'm thinking about it. All right, is the state ready to call its next witness?
We are, Your Honor. The state would call Mychal Johnson to the stand.
Okay, please come forward and stand behind the witness chair. Will you raise your right hand? Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully testify in connection with this cause?
Yes, I do.
Please have a seat. You may remove your mask. And state your full name and spell it.
Mychal Johnson, Mychaljohnson.
All right, officer, a couple things to keep in mind when you're testifying. Yes or no answers, please. Don't shake your head. Don't say uh-huh or uh-uh. If you don't understand a question, ask for clarification. If an objection is made, stop talking immediately. Do not answer unless I tell you to. And remember to wait until the question is finished before you answer, because the court reporter is taking down what's being said. Okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Counsel?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
And I think the court referred to you as officer. You're obviously in a suit, not what we think of as a police uniform. Can you tell us why you're dressed in civilian clothes today?
I'm currently assigned as a patrol major.
And so you don't wear a uniform typically in your job nowadays?
Not right now.
Okay. We will get back to that in a moment, but I'm going to go back and start over. You are currently a peace officer in the state of Minnesota?
Correct.
And you have a license as a peace officer?
Yes, I do.
When did you obtain that license?
In 2005.
And if you could, since then, have you done everything required by the state to maintain your license?
Yes, I have.
And can you tell the jurors, please, your educational background to be a police officer?
I got a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, followed up by a skills certificate that allowed me to be licensed by the state of Minnesota.
And when did you get your bachelor's degree?
In 2002.
And the skills program, when did you finish that?
In 2002.
And so at some point, did you become a police officer with the City of Brooklyn Center?
Yes.
And that was when?
May 31st, 2005.
And so from getting your skills done to that date, did you work at any other law enforcement agencies?
Not as a licensed peace officer.
Okay, explain that to us, please.
I worked as a non-licensed community service officer.
Which jurisdiction was that for?
City of Cottage Grove.
And, when I asked when you started, you said May 31st. Do you remember the date pretty specifically?
Yes.
Why do you remember it so well?
It's everything in the department goes back to that one single date as a start date.
And when you started that date, did you get sworn in
Yes.
and take an oath, that kind of thing?
Yes.
And it's a pretty important day in your career?
Yes, it was.
And so when you started working for Brooklyn Center, what were your job duties?
I was assigned as a patrol officer working an overnight shift.
And so what kind of things did you do as a patrol officer?
Do a little bit of everything for the City of Brooklyn Center, everything from medicals to traffic stops to major type of incidents.
And at some point, did that change from being a patrol officer?
Yes.
And how did that change?
I was assigned to a few of other positions along the way, an auto theft investigator and a detective.
And did you eventually become a sergeant?
Yes,
When did you become a sergeant?
in October of 2015.
And when you're talking about these other things that you did, were they after you became a sergeant or some before?
Those were all before.
So that helped you get promoted to sergeant.
Correct.
What implicit in my question is, that is a promotion to sergeant, right?
Yes, it is.
All right. And when you became a sergeant, how did your duties change? What did they become then?
It then went from being as a call taker specifically to a person who supervised a group of patrol officers as well as still taking some calls.
So were you a patrol sergeant? Would that be the right term?
That would be correct.
And so as a patrol sergeant, are you still out on the streets most of the time?
I would be about 50-50.
And when you're out on the streets, well, I guess all the time you're supervising the patrol officers, right?
Yes.
And so when you have been working or in your work as a Brooklyn Center police officer, did you get to know Officer Kim Potter?
It's a fairly small department, so I had known of her since basically the time I had started, but really didn't get to know her until I had been assigned to the shift she worked on in 2019.
Okay. And in 2019, what do you mean by assigned to a shift?
I had the chance we bid by seniority. I had enough seniority to bid to a day shift, which she was on that day shift.
So prior to that, had you worked shifts with her? I'm not quite sure how that works.
No, I hadn't. I was actually assigned to a night shift where she was assigned still to a day shift. So we never even really saw each other at that point.
So for that 14 years, from 2005 to 2014, or 15, you're on different shifts.
Correct.
Okay. But then in 2019, did you become her supervisor?
Yes.
And so then how often would you supervise Kim Potter?
That would be every working day, which worked out to about 7 days every 2 weeks.
And as you're supervising her, well, strike that. Let me ask you this. Throughout your career at Brooklyn Center, were there times when you socialized with Ms. Potter outside of the workplace?
Not before 2019.
But after that, you had those occasions?
Yes.
And do you also know Officer Anthony Lucky?
Yes.
And when did you get to know him?
I don't know the exact year, but he was one of the explorers for the Brooklyn Center Police Department when he was still in high school.
So still a teenager.
Yes.
And then obviously he became employed at Brooklyn Center as well, correct?
Yes.
And so did you know him then? Well, obviously you knew him. Did you supervise him then?
He was in the field training program. I wasn't the field training supervisor, but for the time that he was assigned to Officer Potter for field training, I was his duty sergeant.
So just so we can understand how that works, the trainees, the probationers, have a separate supervisor for that program.
Yeah, when they're involved in the field training program, there is a supervisor who is in charge of the program, assigns them where they need to be, and track how they're doing.
When they're out on the street, then it's the patrol sergeant who's supervising them technically out on the street. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And then there's also a field training officer with them.
Correct.
Now, I mentioned earlier, kind of why you're not in uniform. Are you still with the Brooklyn Center Police Department?
I am not.
And when did you switch jobs?
In October of 2021.
And where are you working now?
I work for the Goodhue County Sheriff's Office.
And so that is the reason we kind of teased on later, you're not in a uniform. That's a non-uniform position.
Correct.
During your career, have you received training in how to use a taser?
Yes.
And have you been certified to use a taser?
Yes.
Do you recall when you first became certified to use a taser?
The first time was in my initial training of the skills program back in 2002.
So even before you became a police officer?
Yes.
And when you started at Brooklyn Center, did you get authorized to carry a taser for Brooklyn Center?
Yes.
And before you could carry there, did policy require that you receive some training or certification?
Yes, initial training.
And did you do that when you first started in 2005?
Yes.
And since 2005, then, when you were certified, have you been certified every year since then?
Yes.
And when you were patrol and a sergeant, did you carry a taser when you were out on the street?
Yes.
As part of your training, have you been put through what we'll call voluntary, how shall I say this, voluntarily being stunned by a taser?
Yes.
Explain what that means for the jury, please.
As a part of the training, they use the two probes of a taser, and when they pull the trigger of the taser, it then has the incapacitating power over you, and you kind of lose function of your body.
So the voluntary part of this is that you agreed to do it,
Yes.
and that's as part of the training?
Yes.
So they actually shoot you with a taser.
Yes.
And how many times did you volunteer to do that?
Once.
Why not twice?
Because it's not a great feeling.
Okay. And when that's done, are there others around you to help you?
Yes.
And explain that, what that means.
They're there because your muscles will lock up, and if your legs lock up, you lose your balance and can fall over. So they're there to catch you if you fall.
And have you also been involuntarily exposed to the effects of a taser?
Yes.
Can you explain that for the jurors, please?
There have been times that my partners have used a taser on suspects where if your hands get in between the taser probes, you then will receive that current through you
And that has happened to you?
several times.
And how does that feel?
It does not feel very good.
So based on those experiences and your training as a certified taser user, if somebody is going to get tased, what do you need to do if you're holding the person?
You try not to have your hands in between the taser probes.
I'm going to turn your attention to April 11 of 2021. Do you recall that date?
Yes.
And were you working that day?
Yes, I was.
And just tell us what your shift was on that day.
I start my shift at 5:30 in the morning, and it goes until 5:30 in the evening.
And you were a patrol sergeant that day?
Yes.
Do you recall how many officers were out on the streets during that shift?
I don't remember exactly.
How would it typically be? How many would it typically be?
We would typically have 3 to 5 starting at 6 a.m. We would then have one more possibly starting at 2 and one more possibly starting at 4.
And did you hear a call for backup from Officer Lucky?
Yes.
And at the time, did you know he was in a trainee capacity?
Yes.
And he was with an FTO?
Correct.
And did you know who the FTO was?
Yes.
And who was that?
That was Officer Kim Potter.
And so the call was about what do you recall the call for backup being about?
I heard that he was on a traffic stop and was asking for a second officer to his location.
Would that be customary to call a backup on a traffic stop?
Yes.
So nothing unusual about his request for backup on that traffic stop?
No.
And did you respond that you would come to that to back him up?
Yes.
And how did you do that?
Over the radio, I called out my call number and said that I would be en route.
Do you recall him providing the location of the traffic stop?
Yes.
Was it an area you were familiar with?
Yes.
And did you then go to that location?
Yes.
And do you recall roughly how long it took you to get there?
I would probably say 2-3 minutes.
So you were not too far away.
No.
And can you just describe for the jury the general location where that stop was?
I would be around 63rd Avenue and Orchard Avenue.
Now, I'm going to put up on the screen an exhibit number 1, which has been received in evidence. Do you see that exhibit in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Do you recognize what's depicted there?
That would be 63rd Avenue, centralized on Orchard Avenue.
And do you see the location of where the stop was?
Yes.
And there should be in front of you a little stylus.
Yes.
And if you want to just kind of draw a circle around the area where that was. And so, just to be clear, or for the record, you're drawing a circle around the location on this photograph where the blue rectangle and the yellow X are, correct?
Correct.
And so did you, in fact, drive up and stop behind the stop?
Yes.
Okay. And so this location, from your years of working at Brooklyn Center Police Department, what county is this area located in?
Hennepin County.
And as you arrived there, where did you park in relation to Officer Lucky?
I parked directly behind him.
And were you working alone or with another officer?
I was alone.
And so as you got there, did you approach their vehicle then?
Yes.
And what did you see kind of generally when you approached the other squad car?
As I approached, both doors were open of the squad car, with Officer Lucky sitting on the driver's side and Officer Potter sitting on the passenger side. In front of them was a four-door white sedan.
Okay. And did you have a conversation then with either Officer Potter or Officer Lucky?
I talked with Officer Potter.
Okay. And what did you learn?
I learned that the driver of the vehicle had a warrant and was also a party to a order for protection.
And did you learn more information about the warrant as you were there?
Yes.
What did you learn about the warrant?
I learned that it was a gross misdemeanor warrant for a weapons possession.
And based on your years of work as a police officer, what did that gross misdemeanor weapons warrant mean to you? What did that indicate?
It means that a person had been arrested for carrying a firearm without a permit.
So it's a permit violation.
Yes.
And so as you're conversing with them, was a decision made about what to do?
Yes.
And what was that decision?
That Officer Lucky was going to place the driver under arrest and then look more into the order for protection.
And so was that what was done?
Yes.
And how many of you then reapproached the white car?
3 of us.
And how did the three of you divide it up?
Yep. So Officer Lucky went to the driver's side with Officer Potter following a little ways behind him as the training officer, and I approached on the passenger side.
And so why did you go to the passenger side?
Yeah, you usually put one person on each side so that you get a good view inside the vehicle to see what's happening.
So that's sort of standard operating procedure, shall we say, when you approach a vehicle with backup?
It's one way of doing it.
And Ms. Potter went to stay towards the back of the vehicle at the time?
I believe so.
Was that customary for an FTO?
Yes.
On the day of April 11th, were you wearing a body camera?
Yes.
And were you also, operating a squad car that had a dash camera?
Yes.
And, excuse me a second. And the dash camera, was it activated as you came up and stopped at this stop?
It was activated when I activated my body camera.
Okay. So did you activate your body camera before arriving at the stop?
I activated it just as I pulled up.
Okay. And why did you do that?
That's policy. Any traffic stop, we turn on our body camera.
Okay. And so when you do that, your dash camera automatically comes on.
Yes.
And before today, have you had a chance to review your body camera from this incident?
Yes, I have.
And have you also reviewed the dash camera?
Yes, I have.
And before today, we were able to show you some of those that would be exhibits today, correct?
Yes.
And so you recognize those as accurate recordings of what happened.
Yes.
Your Honor, we would offer Exhibit 61.
Is there any objection to 61? There be no objection. 61 will be admitted into evidence and you may publish counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, before we do that, there's a couple of questions I want to ask so that the jurors can understand some of the things going on in the video, all right? Do you recall at one point learning the name of the driver?
Yes.
And what was the name of the driver?
Daunte, Wright.
Do you remember Ms. Potter asking you or making some comment about the Wright brothers?
Yes.
And did you understand what she was talking about? Well, what did that mean to you when she raised that?
It meant she knew something about them that should have kind of sparked my interest.
But your response was what?
I didn't know who they were.
Okay. And the Wright brothers that she was referring to, do you know who she was referring to?
No.
Okay. And had there been a Wright family that had been sort of known to officers?
There was another one that I was aware of.
And they did not have a Daunte Wright?
No.
All right, so what I'm going to do then is start Exhibit 61, please. Now, let's pause here just for a moment, please. So as you can see, there is 2 videos present on the screen, correct?
Yes.
And the video in the lower right, do you recognize what that is?
Yep, that would be the dash cam video for my squad.
And the video in the upper left?
That would be my body cam video.
And just as the video started, we did not hear any audio.
Correct.
Eventually there will be audio, correct?
Yes.
Can you explain why that happens?
Both of the cameras are constantly recording and will save the first 30 seconds before the video is actually started.
And that 30 seconds is the part without audio.
Yes.
Okay. And then as we're looking at this, just for the record, its timestamp is 13:59:16. Where are you driving here in this video?
This would be 63rd Avenue.
And which direction are you heading here?
I believe this would be headed eastbound.
Yeah, I tested you a little too much, didn't I? Is this, you're about to make a U-turn, correct?
Okay, if this is before I'm about to make the U-turn, I'd be going westbound.
Yeah, and so you had to make a U-turn to get back to the stop.
Yes.
And then the 13:59 military time, correct?
Yes.
And so that would be 1:59 p.m.?
Yes.
Okay, let's go ahead and play the video then, please.
No, female doesn't know who he is. Said he's a 14-year-old black male with dreads. When he walked in the house, said he was running from the police and he needed to be quiet until they left.
Even when I find out who the female is, because there's no OFP.
He's got a gross misdemeanor warrant, and there's an OFP for a female, so I need to ID her. There's also residue, like weed on the middle console, so probably search the car. Apparently the car is his brother's.
You want to tell them what the warrant's for?
Warrant is for the weapons violation.
Oh, gross, yeah.
So,
Daunte Wright.
Daunte
Wright?
Wright.
Aren't those the Wright brothers? Not the ones that fly, but the other ones?
I don't think so.
Okay, so I'm just going to get him out and cuff him up. I mean, he's at work, so I'm just
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, we will be here in a second.
And by the way, if I didn't ask you, what is your current rank at Goodhue County?
Major.
Okay, so Major Johnson, we heard in that video a voice saying, "I don't think so." Did you recognize that voice?
Yes,
Whose voice was that?
that was mine.
And that was in response to Ms. Potter's question about the Wright family.
Yes.
So then we saw just at the tail end of that, the three of you start to approach the vehicle, correct?
Yes.
And when you approached the vehicle on the passenger side, what did you observe?
I observed that there was a female sitting in the passenger seat in the front.
Did she have anything in her hands at the time?
Not that I remember.
Okay. Do you remember indicating that she had some paperwork in her hands as you approached?
That's possible.
And then what did you observe next?
I observed that Officer Lucky had asked Mr. Wright to step out of the vehicle.
And did Mr. Wright do that?
Yes.
And what happened then?
I couldn't overhear a lot of what was being said, but I was able to gather he was telling them about the warrant.
Did you hear Officer Lucky tell Mr. Wright to do anything at that point in time?
I heard him tell him to turn around
Okay. And what about his hands? Did he say anything about that?
and put his hands behind his back.
And then at some point, at that point, did you tell Mr. Wright he was under arrest?
Yes, I did.
And why did you tell him that at that point?
Procedurally, you tell somebody that they are under arrest before placing them under arrest. If the person then doesn't cooperate with the arrest, they've been told that lawfully they are being arrested.
And so what's the importance of telling them that right at that moment in time?
Because that was just about before he was to put his hands on Mr. Wright.
So if they don't cooperate, could you charge them with some additional crime?
Yes.
Because you've told them that, right?
Yes.
So then, as you saw that going on, did you hear Officer Lucky saying anything?
Yes.
After what did you hear him say after that?
I heard him say something about don't pull away.
What did you notice anything about Mr. Wright at the time?
I saw part of his body start moving away.
And so what did you observe then after that?
That's when I actually opened the passenger side door.
And why did you open the passenger door?
I was going to make sure the car was in park and the vehicle was shut off so that he couldn't leave.
And so when you opened the passenger door, what did you do next?
I leaned in across the passenger and put my right hand on the shift lever and my left hand on the ignition key.
All right. What about the passenger? Did you take any steps to deal with the passenger at that point?
There wasn't much I was able to do. I was kind of in a compromised position, so I just leaned against her with my body weight.
Okay. And did she put up any resistance to you when you did that?
No.
And at that point, where were you standing?
I was leaning into the vehicle.
Okay. Where were your feet?
Feet were either on the curb or on the street.
And did you said something about grabbing the shift knob, correct?
Yes.
And what did you do with that?
I pushed it forward, which would be towards the park position.
So had it been out of park?
I don't believe so.
Okay. But you said you pushed it forward. I'm just trying to...
I was pushing it as far as it would go forward. That way I knew that it was in the park position.
And did you know whether the engine was on at the time?
I don't.
You indicated you reached toward the keys, right?
Yes.
What were you trying to reach for the keys for?
I was taking the key and I was turning it forward, which would be towards the off position.
So you were attempting to turn the vehicle off?
Yes.
Did you know, but you didn't know whether it was on or off?
I don't know if it was.
And at that point, what was Mr. Wright doing?
He was struggling with Officer Lucky.
Okay. Was he able to get back into the vehicle at that point?
Yes.
And what did you think he was going to try and do at that point?
Drive away.
And so at some point, did you remove your hand from the shift knob?
Yes.
And what did you do then?
I took both my hands and held on to Mr. Wright's right arm.
And were you able to grab his right arm?
Yes.
And why did you grab his right arm?
Two things. One, to prevent him from shifting the vehicle, and one, to put him into a handcuffing position.
At that time, did you know what Officer Lucky was doing?
I couldn't see Officer Lucky at that time.
Did you know what Officer Potter was doing?
I don't.
And you grabbed him to put him in a handcuffing position. I'm not sure how to ask this, but who else did you think was going to help you handcuff him? Does that make sense?
Yes. I believed it would either be Officer Lucky or Officer Potter that would be controlling his left arm to put him in a handcuffing position.
And when you did that, when you grabbed Mr. Wright's right arm, were your feet still on the street or the curb?
Yes.
And did you then hear Officer Potter's voice?
Yes.
What did you hear Officer Potter say?
I heard something to the effect of, "I'll tase you."
And what happened after that?
I heard the verbal command of taser, taser, taser.
And then what happened?
And then I heard a loud pop.
And did you know what the loud pop meant?
I thought at the time that it was a taser.
When you heard taser, 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 what did you do with Mr. Wright?
I let go of his right arm.
And why did you do that?
I didn't know where those taser probes were going to be going, and I didn't want my hand in between them.
And when you let go of him, you had hold of his right arm. Was that the only way you were holding him?
Yes.
And did you see his position at the time that you let go of him?
All I could tell was that he was sitting in the driver's seat.
And where were you looking at that moment in time? Do you recall?
Kind of down towards the center console.
Okay. So after you let go of Mr. Wright, what happened next?
I saw him going for the shift knob, and I started backing out of the vehicle.
And were you able to do that?
Yes.
And before testifying today, have you had a chance to watch your body camera from this time period of the exchange?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, that is Exhibit 63, and we would offer that at this time.
Any objection to 63? Okay, 63 will be admitted into evidence, and you may publish.
All right. Major Johnson, when we play the video, I'm going to freeze it just a few moments to help explain, so you don't have to be talking at the same time the video is running, all right?
Yes.
All right, then, Your Honor, we would publish Exhibit 63.
We will be here in a second. You're under arrest, Daunte.
Now, I have frozen the video here, and for the record should reflect that the timestamp indicates 2:01:52. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. And so we watched the video to that point, and can you describe for the jurors, obviously this is the blue jeans are the passenger, correct?
Yes.
And this is the point where you're sort of leaning against her?
Yes.
Can you describe for the jurors, the arm we see here across really the top of the screen?
Looks like my right arm there is going for the shift knob.
All right. And this is the moment when you were able to, were you at this moment able to grab a hold of the shift knob?
Yes.
And can you tell what your left arm is doing?
I can't see on the screen with the shadow, but that would be the time that my left arm would be going for the key.
And by shadow, what is it?
On the monitor here.
Yeah, you probably can tilt the monitor if that gets rid of some of the glare, maybe? Maybe you can.
Yes.
Okay. And, all right, so this is all right, so what I'm going to do is let this run to 2:02:54. Now, at 2:02:54, do you still see your right hand?
Yes.
And that's still on the shift knob, correct?
Yes.
Can you see the other hands that appear to be by your hand?
Yeah, there looks to be one other hand next to it.
Do you know whose hands those are?
I can't say for sure.
Okay. Who else was in the vehicle at the time?
Mr. Wright.
And, okay, let's run it to 2:01:56, please. So, those hands that we had seen by your hand, now are you able to sort of tell whose hands they were?
Yes.
Okay. Whose were they?
Mr. Wright.
And so he appears to have been trying to move the shift knob,
Yes.
but you prevented him from doing that.
Yes.
And then he pulled away from that, correct?
Yes.
Now, in this moment, we can see your right hand still on shift knob, is that right?
Yes.
And what is your left hand doing?
That would be reaching for him.
And we'll hear a voice say, "Just stay back." Do you recall who said that?
I didn't hear that part.
Okay. All right, let's play to 58, please.
Just stay back.
you hear the voice there?
Yes,
Whose voice is that?
that was me.
And who are you saying that to?
That would be to the female passenger.
And did she stay there?
Yes.
And then we also just heard another female voice in the background. Did you recognize that voice?
Yes.
Whose voice was that?
That was Officer Potter.
So then let's run this to 59, please. Now, at this point in time, can you describe for the jurors what you've done with your right arm?
That's gone to reach for his arm.
And in the background, did you hear a female voice again?
Yes.
And who is that?
Officer Potter.
And then let's go to 2020. Now, at this point in time, did you hear that female voice in the background?
Yes.
Did you recognize that voice?
Yes.
And who is that?
Officer Potter.
And can you describe for the jurors what you're doing here in this still moment at 2:02:00?
I'm holding on to his right hand and arm.
And is your left arm holding on to him as well?
Both are, yes.
And your right hand appears to have a grip on Mr. Wright's hand in a certain way.
Yes.
Can you describe for the jurors what you're doing there?
I'm holding on to it so that he both can't grab onto something, and also it's a position to hold, place him back into a handcuffing position.
Is there a term for that particular way of holding them?
I don't have one.
Okay, like a wrist lock or something.
That's not specifically a wrist lock.
Okay, but this is a way of getting him ready to handcuff or not?
Yes.
All right. And at this point in time, you have his arm, Mr. Wright's right arm, over the passenger?
Yes.
Okay, we'll let this run to the end now, please.
You did?
Yes!
Okay.
I grabbed the wrong fucking gun! I shot him! Oh my god!
Okay. Tim, sit down.
And Major Johnson, in meeting with you, we showed you a composite video of Officer Lucky's dash camera and your body camera during this time period, correct?
Yes.
And that is done to help the jurors understand the overall scene.
Yes.
And does that composite video fairly capture what happened in this time period?
Yes.
Your Honor, we would offer Exhibit 62, which is that video.
Any objection to 62? 62 will be admitted and you may play it.
We will be here in a second. You're under arrest, Daunte. Just stay back. You did?
Yes!
Okay.
I grabbed the wrong fucking gun! I shot him! Oh my god!
Okay. Tim, sit down.
PI access 63rd and Captain Drive, flight from 38 stop, start north on the red.
Starting north on the red, then can you repeat your first part you said?
Before Miss Potter said, "I shot him," did you know that that sound had been a gunshot?
No.
And after that, did you observe what happened to the white car?
Yeah, I observed it continue eastbound down 63rd and drive into oncoming traffic.
And did you, obviously, you heard that there was a crash down that direction.
Yes.
So sometimes it's maybe easier for us to refer to the stop scene and the crash scene. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Because there were essentially two scenes that day.
Yes.
Did you go down to the crash scene?
No.
And why not?
Because Officer Salvosa was already there.
Okay, and how did you know that?
I could see his squad pulling up right as Mr. Wright's vehicle had gone into incoming traffic.
And at that point, did you know that Mr. Wright had been shot by Ms. Potter?
I knew that a shot had been fired, but I didn't know if he was hit.
So when you're saying he drove into incoming traffic, you didn't know his physical condition at the time of the crash?
Correct.
Now, we heard some radio traffic calling for north on the Reds. Did you recognize that voice?
Yes.
Whose voice was that?
Officer Salvosa.
And did you do anything with your radio at that point in time?
I was trying to transmit, but I wasn't able to
Why not?
because there was other people on the radio.
So only one radio can run at a time.
Yes.
And so were you eventually able to get on, well, was it Officer Salvosa's radio traffic that was interfering with yours?
I think so.
Could be, I guess is one way to say it.
Yes.
Yeah, right. And then, so were you able to eventually get on the radio?
Yes.
And what did you do?
I called out that we had had shots fired and asked for additional resources to 63rd and Noble.
When you said shots fired, plural, do you know why you said shots if there was only one?
It's just always the way that it's been said. I don't know where it came from, so it's just been shots.
Yeah, just sort of typical language, right?
Yes.
And then, so the additional people that you called in, why did you do that?
Because I knew that we had two scenes. We did have shots fired, and we're going to need additional help no matter what it was that had happened.
If an officer is involved in a shooting, are there separate procedures that take over to deal with that kind of situation?
Yes.
And in those situations, are there officers known as involved and uninvolved?
Yes.
And at this point in time, did you know that you would be an involved officer
Yes.
and that Potter and Lucky would also be involved officers?
Yes.
So what did that mean to you at that point in time with regard to your supervisor role right then?
It meant that I needed somebody to take over as the scene supervisor once that was possible, because I wouldn't be able to do all of the things that needed to be done as being an involved officer.
And so then you called in, I think you mentioned other agencies. Do you recall doing that?
Yes.
Why?
I didn't know how many officers we currently had clear in Brooklyn Center, but I knew that we were going to need more than we had available that day.
And what did you ask at that point in time Officer Potter and Lucky to do?
I asked them to sit down.
And and did your body-worn camera continue to run?
Yes.
And have you been able to observe that video as well, your body-worn camera following the incident?
Yes.
At this time, we would offer Exhibit 64, which is that video.
Any objection to 64?
Objection.
64 will be admitted and you may publish.
You did?
Yes!
Okay.
I grabbed the wrong fucking guy! I shot him! Oh my god!
Okay. Him, sit down.
freeze it right there just for a quick moment. And for the record, timestamp at the top is 14:02. There were 3 or 4 audible beeps. Can you explain to the jury what those beeps are?
That was me trying to transmit over my radio. However, at the same time, somebody was already transmitting.
So that beep is an indication of what you described earlier, not being able to get on.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Starting north on the red, and can you repeat your first right?
3205, we got shots fired. Start more units, please. We're going to need additional units to Noble and 63rd.
Just breathe. Are you okay? Just breathe.
Reach your 19-7 at gunpoint, 63rd and Captain Drive.
Copy, 1 at this way, 6th
And
Kim, take a breath, okay?
just breathe. Car injured as well. As soon as we get additional cars, I'll check for injuries. Suspects are not compliant. They're moving it.
No, you're not. Just
Bridges have from 1 on the unit.
Kim, that guy was trying to take off with me in the car.
okay.
3205, can you start some additional supervisors from other agencies, please?
He's still.
Yeah,
Crystals and road. 4142 en route. Not locked in route.
yeah, Kim, take a breath, okay?
6 en route.
Kim, take a breath. You're all right, Kim.
Reach tonight, and we'll take 2 rigs, stage them a couple of blocks out.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Copy, stage couple blocks up.
Driver, stop breathing.
Driver not breathing.
No.
I'll take an additional squad and we'll yank him out. But get him here on the rest. I'm by myself, holding him at gunpoint.
Kim, take a breath. Kim, breathe, okay?
We can get the road shut down, westbound.
Yeah, just park
I'll take it there.
my squad, not yours. Park with my squad.
Northbound on 63rd.
Kim, take a breath. Kim, you're okay. Take a breath, okay?
Oh my God!
Reach him, I can make it 3 rigs. I got 1 male not breathing, 1 female with facial lacerations, and then I've got another civilian car that I have not been able to check on yet.
Copy, 3 rigs.
Well, 3205, we'll take anybody that's available. We need additional help.
5153, I'll be arriving.
5153, copy.
Squad, come to me at 63rd and Catherine so we can get the driver out and the passenger, and then we'll have to check on anyone else after. But the driver is not breathing according to the passenger.
What have I done? What have I done?
Several Brooklyn Park units are arriving.
1405.
Yeah, we're all right.
Passenger's moving around. I can't see him, so we're going to need to extricate him if he's not breathing. So I'll wait for additional to come up with a plan. Three 207's arriving.
Okay.
1406.
Hey, Anthony, and you just sit down here, okay?
3219, the suspect I'm at gunpoint at is a flee from 38 stop.
1406.
Hey, both you guys, okay? Are you anything injured?
3207, whoever's got a bunker, come on up to Catherine 63rd. For domestic, 15-year-old son, 2624 94th Avenue. 4142 arriving.
1406.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Dad, can you call Chuck for me?
Yep, hey, Kim, as soon as we're code 4 here, I'm going to get all that taken care of for you, okay? I'm just, take care of that first, and then I'll need somebody. Take a breath, okay, Kim? Take a breath.
In the video, Ms. Potter can be heard saying, "I'm going to prison." And that was when you said to her that he was trying to drive off with me in the car.
Yes.
Do you remember saying that to her?
I actually don't.
And when did you learn that you had said that to her?
When I watched my body cam video.
How long after the incident was that?
It was probably about a week.
In that video, she also asked to call Chuck, correct?
Yes.
Did you understand what she was asking?
Yes.
Who is Chuck?
That would be Detective Chuck Ballou.
And do you know how to spell his last name?
It's V as in Victor, Alleeau.
And did you understand why she wanted to call Mr. Ballou?
Yes.
Why?
Because he would be her union representative.
While you were working, well, on April 11th, were you a member of that union?
No.
Were the patrol officers a member of that union?
Yes.
And was Ms. Potter, did you know if she was in a role with the union?
This is irrelevant. Being a member of the union has nothing to do with this case.
The objection is sustained and the jury will disregard.
Your Honor, may I be heard about that, please?
My original ruling is granting the objection.
Your Honor, I don't remember if you did or not. Could you tell the jury not to regard that testimony?
Okay. Ms. Potter's union membership is not relevant to any issue in this case. You are to disregard any testimony regarding that. Okay?
And so, Major Johnson, did you then, for the rest of that shift until you left, stay at the stop scene?
No.
Right. At some point, you left the scene altogether. I guess my question should be more precise. Did you ever go to the other scene, the crash scene?
No.
And while you were still back at the stop scene, did you do something with Ms. Potter's firearm?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jurors what you did?
Due to her mental state of not knowing what she might do, I knew that her firearm was a piece of evidence at that time. So I removed her firearm and put it in my holster and put my gun in her holster, just so that that evidence was preserved.
And then was that all captured by body camera as well?
Yes.
And, Your Honor, we would offer at this time Exhibit 65.
Just testify, you know.
Okay. The objection is overruled. I'll allow you to play the video. And 65 will be admitted into evidence.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Stay right here. Stay right here, okay? Kim, I'm going to take this, but give you mine, okay?
Don't just let me
No.
kill myself like
No, that's not happening, Kim. I'm giving you my gun, okay? I'm just gonna hold on to yours. All right? Kim? We'll get it all figured out, okay?
I don't know. I don't know what's happened.
Okay, Kim, sit down, breathe, okay? I'm just gonna put my gun in your holster
I
for
don't
you,
know what
okay?
happened. Okay. I don't know.
But can you come over and sit by Lucky?
Yeah.
Right?
I'll shut the camera off after.
I'm still rolling.
It's fine. I don't.
Incidentally, Major Johnson, were you wearing a taser that day?
Yes.
And during this time period that we just saw, immediately after the incident, did you check Potter and Lucky for injuries?
Yes.
And did you see any injuries?
No.
Did they report any injuries?
No.
And did other officers eventually come to the scene?
Yes.
And as part of that process you made reference to earlier, did you assign officers to Potter and Lucky?
Yes.
And explain just real briefly why you do that.
It's just to make sure that they are being taken care of, that we keep them uninvolved from the incident, that they don't hear anything else that is happening, and that person's kind of their caregiver for the next little while.
And under that policy, are the involved officers supposed to talk about the incident?
No.
And when, at some point, did another sergeant arrive to sort of take over a supervisory role there at the scenes?
Yes.
And did you provide information to that sergeant about what you knew?
Yes.
Just to be clear, it was a Brooklyn Center sergeant?
2 Brooklyn Center sergeants.
Okay. And then did they sort of take over control of everything at that point?
Yes.
And you provided them the important information that they needed to do that, to take over?
Yes.
And did you, subsequent to that, or later, obtain more information that concerned you about Officer Potter?
Yes.
And what was that?
That another officer was concerned that she may harm herself.
And which officer was that?
That was Officer Clean Fricky.
Do you know how to spell her last name?
Yes. F as in Frank, R-I-C-K-E.
And so, what did you do?
Officer Potter was sitting in a squad, and so I had gone over to her and discreetly asked if I could see my firearm that was in her holster. I was able to turn away from her with my firearm, remove the magazine from it and the 1 round that was in the chamber. So at that time there were no rounds in the firearm.
Did you do this in a way that she could see it?
She was not able to see.
And did you give the ammunition to somebody?
Yes, I handed it to Officer Fricky.
And then did you get it back?
Yes.
All right. And so at that point in time, where is the gun that Officer Potter used in the incident?
In my holster.
And where is your gun?
It is in Officer Potter's holster.
And the ammunition from your gun is where?
In my pocket.
Your Honor, we are going to offer Exhibit 71, which is a video of this incident.
Any objection? Okay, the objection is overruled. I'm going to let 71 in and to be played.
And will you actually, because you weren't here at all, right? Can you stay with her? I would rather, she knows you, I'd rather have you stay with her if possible.
Can I read this?
Yeah.
squad who needs an ambulance. She needs a cutlet.
Okay.
It's waiting on
Talk to Peterson or somebody else. Okay. All I want you to worry about now is
There's a female in the back of 332. She has some facial injuries. Can you just make sure she gets seen?
Kim, can I see my gun real quick? I'm going to give it right back to you, okay? I'm just going to give her my gun for now. Okay. I have yours, okay? Chuck is on his way, all right?
And then, at some point, did a commander come to the scene?
Yes.
And so just explain to us the kind of the hierarchy of sergeant, commander.
Yes, so sergeant, and then my direct supervisor would be the patrol commander, and his direct supervisor would be the chief of police.
And who was the patrol commander at the time?
Tony Grunig.
And you can see the habit I'm in. Can you spell Grunig for us?
Yes. It's G as in George, Ruenig.
And did he eventually come to the scene?
Yes.
And did you provide him information from the incident?
Yes.
And everything that you thought was important there?
Yes.
And did you explain to him that you thought the person was trying to drive away with you in a car?
No.
And were you able to then sort of stop any responsibility you had for controlling the scene and turn that over?
Yes.
And were you eventually taken from the scene?
Yes.
And somebody gave you a ride?
Yes.
And you went back to where?
The Brooklyn Center Police Department.
And did you understand at some point later then that the investigation would be taken over by an outside agency?
Yes.
And which agency was that?
The Bureau of Criminal Apprehension.
And did you have an opportunity to meet with investigators from the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension later?
Yes.
Just for the jurors' brief understanding, they are a state law enforcement agency.
Correct.
And during that part of the day, did the BCA investigators talk to you about the firearms?
Yes.
And can you describe for the jurors, what was done in that regard with regard to the two firearms, yours and Potter's?
Yes. They came to me and I had explained the circumstances of why I had that firearm, and they then collected the firearm from me.
When you say the firearm,
that was in my holster.
And which we knew at that point was the one that you had taken from Officer Potter?
Yes.
All right. And what happened then after that?
That was turned over to them as evidence.
All right. What about your firearm?
I didn't see my firearm again.
Okay. So the BCA did not bring your firearm back to you?
No.
Okay. Shortly after this, you wrote a brief report about what happened, correct?
Yes.
And would it refresh your recollection about those moments if you had a chance to look at that briefly?
Yes.
Okay. You know, may
I do have a copy of it.
Oh, with you?
Yes, I do.
If you want to look at if you could please, the second page, the last paragraph. Do you see that?
Yes.
And counsel, just for the record, Bates 650. Just read that to yourself. Does that refresh your recollection about your firearm?
Yes.
Okay. So did they bring you your firearm at some point?
They may have brought mine back, but I didn't get it back.
Okay.
That is still with the BCA.
All right. So they came to you with it, but maintained it as well?
Yes.
All right. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay. And so you turned over to them Potter's firearm as well?
Yes.
And as part of that interaction with the BCA agents, did they actually take photographs of you in your uniform?
Yes, they did.
Okay. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Okay, members of the jury, we're going to take our morning break. Okay, so 20 minutes. You may step down, Major. Okay, counsel for the state, I just want to emphasize again that I'm going to start regularly sustaining objections to cumulative. If you put a witness on the stand, go through a lot of detail on what happened, and then want to show the video afterwards. I think Mr. Frank was pretty efficient during the beginning when he was showing the tape, stopping it, and having the officer explain what they were seeing. But I'm not going to allow any more lengthy testimony about what's going to happen and then show the video. So please keep that in mind. All right, I'm going to check and see. I think what we need to do is we have to be able to finish the cross on Major Johnson, but today, so we're not going to split it up. But let's take a 20-minute break and I'll check out what the weather is. Okay.